Joining us to talk about it, Scott Laughlin. And as usual, Scott, I was listening. You and Gordy said today, 2 days before the trade is the day. Historically, it has been. And here we go. What's your read on the Tarasenko to Florida deal?
Well, I like it a lot for the Panthers. There's no question. Expiring contract, no doubt. Senators get a couple of picks back. They'll split the remaining salary the rest of the way, right down the middle. Look, I think, Rod, you see it night in and night out. This Florida Panthers team is the best team in the National Hockey League right now. There's no question about it. If anything, they kind of lament the fact that the playoffs didn't start tonight because they're ready to roll. They're loaded on the back end, as we know. They're loaded now up front with the extra half goal per game that it takes at playoff time to win games, and they experienced all that last spring, as we know. So this is a deep, experienced team that believes that they're confident enough to win. We've looked lately to see the Lamborghini and Nick Cousins and different depth guys like that make a difference for the Florida Panthers. So right now, if they are going to do this, and they have done it with Ottawa, and if this is all they're going to do, I think Bill Zito feels pretty confident with what he's put together down there in South Florida.
I think it's a win-win for both sides. Ottawa, I'm sure, is happy to get the pick back. But this is a guy that, obviously, I respect your opinion. I listen to you every day. Why was Tarasenko always had 1 foot out the door in St. Louis? And why do the Rangers and Senators not want to hang on to this guy? Does he have baggage? I don't understand why he's not looked upon as that franchise cornerstone guy. The talent's there, so there's got to be something else.
Well, it's interesting, too, because I would draw the comparison with a guy like Jacob Chychrun, too, right? Like, we've seen Chychrun, and we've seen him bounce around, and we knew that he was as good as gone from Arizona, and that it took a while. He gets to Ottawa for a year, and now we're hearing a lot about the fact that Jacob Chychrun could be made available to the top guy as well. So sometimes I just think it's a victim of circumstance. I think back when you think to him being a St. Louis Blue, who could forget, Rod, he and Ken Hitchcock getting into that exchange on the bench in Chicago during that game, of course, where he was disgruntled about something that Hitch had said to him at that present point in time. I just think it's a circumstantial type thing where more or less he's been a hired gun of late. I think he's going to be a hired gun by the Florida Panthers, and they think that if they can get the extra half goal per game, like I said, that might serve them well in the end and maybe take them to that Stanley Cup. And as you say, Ottawa perhaps gets a fourth instead of a third. Make that, a third instead of a fourth.
Right. Evander Kane showed up in Edmonton with a reputation and baggage, and he's been nothing but a model citizen, which says a lot about the Oilers dressing room. So, and I'm not comparing Tarasenko to Kane. You get it. I'm just wondering how it'll all work here. But hopefully, for the sake of the Panthers, it works out similar to that. So you and Gordy we're excited about the trades coming up. So do you expect that it's going to get wild here?
I think so. All the insiders, Elliot Friedman was the latest to tell us today, and we heard yesterday even that by the end of today, Pittsburgh is looking to get something done with regards to Gensel. And whether it's Gensel to Vancouver, like we've connected the dots, or whether it's a team like the Rangers jumping in on Gensel, that would be seismic. We're starting to hear the Rangers kicking tires on Gensel as well. I think that that's something you can probably look forward to by the end of today. And what did we have last year at this time? A couple days away from the trade deadline, Rod, we had, 10 deals go down too. So I would think that this Tarasenko trade today is probably the first of many. By day's end, we're going to be talking about some big-time trades, especially Jake Gensel going out the door, leaving the Pittsburgh Penguins. And wouldn't that be something for a guy who's meant so much to not only the Penguins, but to Sidney Crosby specifically?
Yeah, for sure. But, we had Josh Getzoff on this show last week, the voice of the Penguins. And he said, before they started this Western road trip, and he goes, this next week's going to tell us what the Penguins are made of. And then they lose 3 in a row. So it did tell them, so I guess it's funny how that works, right? How the teams look at it. And it's like, yeah, we're not a contender. So is it over? Is it over, Scott, the good times in Pittsburgh?
Well, look, if I was Kyle Dubas, I would look at Malkin. I would look at Letang. But, then you factor in the Crosby situation, right? And look, Sid, I think, was more than willing and is still more than willing to play out the string with the Pittsburgh Penguins. But a little precondition towards that, we've all thought, has always been he wants to go out arm in arm with Malkin. He wants to go out arm in arm with Chris Letang. So if you say, okay, keep the band together again, all you can do is retool. And whether that's Gensel, whether that's moving out a Jari in goal or a Nedeljkovic in goal, Perhaps that's something they could look at. Riley Smith coming off the three-point performance just last night is another chip perhaps Kyle Dubas could use to maybe just change things around a little bit. But essentially, when you've got Crosby and you've got Malkin and you've got Letang, if you're assuming they're all going out together and they're all going to be making Hall of Fame speeches together someday, I think your hands are kind of tied, and there's only a certain amount of maybe dissection of this roster that Kyle Dubas can really sink his teeth into.
Isn't that interesting when you say that? I think Crosby will have the opportunity to write his ticket at the end. It reminds me of Bedard in Regina. Sorry to say, because he's at the other end of the scale, but Connor didn't want to be traded, so they didn't trade him. They left it up to the player. That's pretty rare, Scott, but that tells you special players can do that, and that's probably what's going to happen in Pittsburgh. Right? Now, Wayne wanted out in various places, but that's what Wayne wanted. Certain players can do that.
Yeah, and look, we have known that list to be few and far between in terms of guys who could play their entire careers with one franchise. You think to Joe Sakic, Quebec to Colorado. That was something he had no control over, clearly. Stevie Yzerman with the Detroit Red Wings. These sorts of things don't really happen all that often. And I think for Crosby, I think it's kind of pre-written that this is the way it's going to go. He's meant so much to the Penguins. He's meant so much to the National Hockey League. They've got the 3 Stanley Cups. They've made run after run after run. So if anybody can run his own ticket, you're absolutely correct, Rod. It's going to be a guy like 87 in Pittsburgh.
Hey, last one, Scott. Totally off the board. And by the way, Jamie Cooey's lined up and ready to go live from the Briar, but I want to ask you about other things. When you come on, I felt like playing some hairband, because that's what I always hear when I'm listening to you. But we were talking about culture earlier. We are both Cowboys fans.
Yeah.
So I guess C.D. Lamb alluded to Cowboys culture this week. I think we know it's bad, right? What is your take on Cowboys culture in 90 seconds or less?
Well, it's funny, Rod, because I had a conversation with Tim Brown, and I'm sure you've talked to Tim over the years too, Hall of Fame receiver, one of the all-time greats from the Dallas area, as we know. And going back to the NHL awards back in 2014, I think it was, I talked with Tim, and he didn't necessarily bring this up on the air, and maybe I'm speaking at a school a little bit, but I asked him off the air, what's wrong with the Cowboys, the whole bit? And being from that area, and this was an interesting take on the situation, Tim Brown said that there's just a sense of entitlement with having that star on the side of your helmet. I mean, this stretches back a decade now where Tim Brown is telling me that the Cowboys maybe have an entitlement problem. They've got a culture problem down there in Dallas. Everybody feels like they're a little bit bigger than maybe that they are. And I think that factors into it. How else could you explain, Rod, what's happened to the Cowboys the last couple of years in particular? One of the most talented teams in the league. At times it's been coaching. At times it's been turnovers from Dak Prescott. The reality is they just haven't gotten it done. And whether it's a culture problem or an execution problem, I mean, things can only get better, Rod, right?
Bro, it goes hand in hand with being the biggest dog in town. Leafs, Flames, Rough Riders, Dolphins. We don't need to win, and the barn's full. So we're good. Great answer.
You're absolutely right. It's been said of the Leafs, too. Here in Toronto, Rod, it's been said of the Leafs, to your point. Everybody gets elevated, knocked up a couple of notches up that ladder when you play for the Toronto Maple Leafs, and maybe that sets the expectation levels out of whack just a little bit.
Wonderful chat. Scott, thanks for this. Keep it up, man. Always listening. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Rod.